Right, thank you very much. Can you see my title screen, The Micklegate Mystery? Mike, can you see it? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Thanks. Fantastic. We are on our way back to starting in 19th century York tonight. And I'm going to outline the case. I'm going to read extensive testimony, and I'm going to ask you how we should go about researching it now and trying to solve the mystery. So our story begins with a very famous eccentric. I say he was an eccentric. Some might say he was a genius. He certainly was unusual. Let's begin with this gentleman. Oh, hang on. Here we go. There's just a summary of what we're going to be talking about. In the Victorian era, scores of respectable church-going residents of York saw what they believed was a church while attending Holy Trinity, Micklegate. The issue of the ghosts, for eventually 3 was seen, was a nuisance to the authorities, an irritation to the vicar, and a source of heated debate amongst scientifically minded folk. What was the source of the Micklegate mystery, and can ASSAP solve it? So tonight we're going to talk about Sabine or Sabine, depending on which country you come from. Baring Gould. I think he would probably have said Sabine Baring Gould. He lived from 1834 to 1924, and he certainly, well, I'm trying to think of anyone who comes close today. There's that Conservative MP, the Minister for the 19th century. He seems a little similar in some ways, but I don't think Sabine was quite so, yeah. This is the fellow, as you can see. This is various. He lived during an era when photography was just coming in, and so we actually do have a couple of decent photos of him. And he was an English country vicar. He served as a curate and spent some time in Yorkshire. Most of his life was spent in the West Country, and he was passionately attached to Devon and Dorset. And Lew Trenchard was his house. It's where the village, his final parish, and it's now a hotel and a museum dedicated to his works. What would you know him from? I guarantee, though you might not realize it, that you know at least one thing he did. Actually, I can't guarantee that because there's a good chance you won't, but I guarantee that the majority of you will have heard it. Oh, this is Poussin's The Rape of the Sabine Women. And the problem I had always with Sabine Baring Gould was I found his name deeply unpleasant, because the Rape of the Sabines is an incident in Roman history. The word rape is a mistranslation, I think. It means kidnap or abduction. But the young Roman citizens found themselves with far too many soldiers and men and not enough women. So they went round the Sabine tribes and stole their women and brought them back and married them. It's the same plot for Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, the Hollywood film. But the term is obviously loaded and unpleasant, and it's the last thing that anyone would call their child. So why was he called Sabine Baring Gould? The reason is after this chap, Sir Edward Sabine, who was his uncle, who was an Irishman. He was only about 20 years older, and he was one of the first polar explorers. He wasn't just a polar explorer. Edward Sabine also was a scientist of some repute, and he set up around England, around the world, a whole set of observatories which took measurements of the magnetic field. He was interested in magnetism as a phenomena and the magnetic poles, and you can Wikipedia him to find out more. The only reason, so that's why Sabine was called Sabine, but he was from a relatively wealthy Anglican family. So here's a few of my favorite quotes from him. I'll just leave those on the screen so you can choose a couple if you want, but I think the best one is the one in the middle. In North Germany, a troublesome ghost is bagged, and the bag emptied in some lonely spot or in the garden of a neighbour against whom a grudge is entertained. Wouldn't it be ghost hunting be much more fun if it was for the purpose of catching the ghost in a bag and taking it over to someone you don't like's house and releasing it? Anyway, if you look through some of these quotes, you might recognize some of the kind of influences and interests he had. I think nowadays he'd be called a medievalist, a folklorist, a Fortean, and many other things as well. Why? Because he wrote 1,240 books. That is to say, he published 1,240 books that librarians have so far been able to archive. Unfortunately, his rate of publication was such that no one has ever created a definitive catalogue, so we do not know exactly how many books he managed to publish in his lifetime. Rob, have you published 1,240 books yet? No. Bill? No. I think most of us, even Mike, who also works in publishing, would struggle to have that kind of output. And he was doing this on his own, having the books set and published. And bizarrely, they are not crank works. They are works of significant scholarship. And he spends an awful lot of time on sources. He is a pedantic academic, but he was a pedantic academic monograph machine who constantly published. And most of his books have titles like, geological features of Devon, or interesting beaches of Cornwall, or quiet pubs of Wiltshire. I stopped him once. But other books he published have titles like The Book of Werewolves and A Book of Ghosts. So this gentleman, a very devout Christian, was fascinated by the werewolf, and he dedicated more than one, in fact 3 or 4 books, to the subject of collecting werewolf legends. He was fascinated by vampirism, and he collected anecdotes about that. He collected anecdotes of, well, so many ghost stories that it's untrue. It's just they're scattered through all his books, so nobody again has made a definitive count. But he collected folklore about witchcraft, and he believed, as you probably gathered from the quotes on the previous page, that many of these represented a pagan survival, and that the medieval world was closer to the world of paganism because, strands of pagan thought had entered into Christianity. And this is a belief that goes on and influences the founders of Wicca, who believe they're restoring an old religion and they're de-Christianizing folk religions. I'm not saying that's true in the slightest. I don't believe it is, but it's what he believed at the time in the 19th century. It may or may not have some truth in it. So what was it he did that you will all know? Well, it was this. Can I play it? This is the question. I can watch it on YouTube. Here we go. Can you hear that?
I'm not hearing anything at the moment.
Yes, I can hear it.
Could you hear the music or not?
Yes.
Yep, all right. That is unfortunately correct. So, Onward, Christian Soldiers. How many of you have actually heard it? Most of you know that? Yeah. It's one of those hymns that was to be incredibly popular in what's now called muscular Christianity. And he was the author of Onward, Christian Soldiers. He wrote dozens of hymns. I think Lead Kindly Light is another one of his, but at the end of the day, there's so many of them, and many of them are famous and appear in hymns, ancient and modern. So we're talking about a muscular Christian, conservative churchman who liked to run. Oh no, don't play any more of that. I've had enough of that. Thank you. Okay. How do I move on to the next page? Oh, there we go. So why am I talking about Sabine Bearing Gold? Because he wrote a wonderful book that came out in 1871, with the title Yorkshire Oddities. Oh, I hope the music stopped. I can't actually tell. If it hasn't, just message me. But anyway, yeah, 1871 Yorkshire Oddities. It also is released later as some Yorkshire Curiosities, but it's the same book. So if you ever find a copy of it, it's well worth reading. You can get it, download it from Project Gutenberg in ebook, as a mobile Mobi file for Kindle, and various other formats. And it is a collection of stories about complete nutcases. There is no other term for it. Where I come from in Bury St Edmunds, there are people who are known as a bit of a ledge, meaning a legend. And invariably, they are complete lunatics who damage other people's property, set fire to themselves, expose themselves on the high street, or do other things which make them, you know, extremely popular and a source of great popular amusement. These are the kind of characters that he loves and he extols. And there are also people who he regards as truly heroic. A blind man who fought in wars, set up a road building business, had a massive business empire, married well, lived a good life and died happy, but was completely blind from birth. Another blind chap who rode all over England and who learned every road by touch and by sound and just made his way around, and acted as a guide for travelers, and many other characters who overcame adversity. In many ways, he's very modern in his absolute celebration of those who are differently abled, and the fact that he doesn't feel pity for those people in the slightest. He believes that they are, you know, like everybody else, challenged, and some of them rise above it and some of them don't. He's a peculiar guy to read. He doesn't make many moral judgments, and for the author of Onward Christian Soldiers, the hymn, you would expect someone who was deeply opposed to paganism and who was thoroughly judgmental. Nothing could be further from the truth. He was actually very fond of and very sympathetic to witches, but not in the Enlightenment way of thinking that they were all frauds and shysters and little old ladies who just happened to own a cat. He actually believed, you know, I think he believed that they might have possessed supernatural powers. Right. Okay. I don't know how long I've been talking for, but that's enough about him. In his 1871 book, he discovered something which to this day has not really been solved. And the case takes place on a street called Micklegate. Now, I've not been there for years. I stayed at the top of Micklegate, somewhere around here, for my honeymoon once, many years ago, or a holiday or something. I can't remember. I went to York once, and I've walked this street many times with the students, but many of my friends were students there. I think I saw Hannah come in. Hannah, you said you lived in Micklegate, didn't you? Are you there? Where's Hannah?
Yes.
Unmute yourself. Hi.
Hello. Yeah. Yes, I lived just off Blossom Street, which is the street at the top, so I could see it from my bedroom window at the top of Micklegate. So I know this very well, this area.
I know the medieval gateway that you go through, and I know the road down. I played an Ars Magica campaign that was set in a covenant on Micklegate, so I know the medieval streets quite well from the game because we used the genuine medieval maps. But tell me, what's Micklegate like? It's quite steep, isn't it? It goes down to the bridge over the river.
Yes, it's lovely. It's still quite kind of historical feeling. It's quite famous for something called the Micklegate Run, which is because there's lots of pubs. So
Yep.
you do often see some quite inebriated students at the end of it. But it's got, I think the church on the right is in Peter Ackroyd's The English Ghost book, featuring some kind of haunting.
Yeah, that might very well be what I'm about to talk about. But
Okay, sorry. Forget.
no, that's fine. That's fine. Unfortunately, I've known students who've fallen in the river drunkenly after the Micklegate run. So there you go. But that's just York for you, isn't it?
Yeah. It is.
Okay. So the next map is the same map as we've just looked at. And as you go down Micklegate, on the right, you have indeed got a church. There's Trinity Church. There used to be several. There was St. John's, which was down here, I think, and another one, the name of which I've completely forgotten. There were 3 or 4 churches in the area, but Micklegate had a priory, which was over here. But what we're going to be looking at is Micklegate Church. So let's zoom in on it. Now, I am going to be talking about the east window of Micklegate Church. And if you look over here, you'll see Jacob's Well. I'll show you that in a moment. you'll see the vicarage, and you'll see the vicarage garden and some elm trees which grow behind the east window. And as you go in, there's a tower on your left, and they've rebuilt the roof for some reason there. Probably added that bit on recently, I think, but anyway, we'll get to that. So this building is what we're going to be talking about in quite a lot of detail. Here's a photo of the building from the side of the road, and you can't actually see it because there's buildings there, but there's a wall along there, and if you can see through the trees, you can see this is what you would see. Oh, where's it gone? So that's the side of the building. The front door coming in off, no, it's not Trinity Lane. Trinity Lane's down the back of it. Coming in off the road to the right, which is Priory Street. Another photo from the direction of Micklegate, which just gives you a rough idea of, you know, the length of the building. And here we've got a rather nice and blurry, because I couldn't afford to buy the print because it was a ridiculous sum of money, but it's a sale for sale at a dealer's at the moment. There's a print showing 2 elm trees that grew behind the east window at the back end. And I think there's been an extension actually at the back as well. Inside, we have the east window. On the left is the east window. It's by a particularly famous maker of Victorian stained glass, or in this case, Edwardian stained glass. It was his last major work before he died in 1907. And it's dedicated to a couple of sisters. And if I look through my notes, I can tell you their names, which would be good. Hang on. In memory of Fanny Potter, Mary Dickinson, and George Russell. And it was made, it's by Kemp, spelled with an E, as in Marjorie. But in this case, a chap who made the stained glass, and it was made in 1907. On the right is a fairly typical piece of medieval stained glass. I'm saying it's medieval because you see the beautiful blue colour that you have here. It's very, very rare to see that in anything after medieval glass. The actual methods that were used chemically to make medieval glass colouring are still not fully understood, and the Victorians didn't have the chemical dyes to replicate it properly. So the way you can tell the difference between medieval glass and Victorian glass is on the right, medieval glass, it's got light shining through it, but you can see that wonderful translucency and the way that the opaque colours, the oranges and the blues and the reds glow. It's not just the light behind it, it's actually a quality of the glass. I'm sure I'm really boring you all to death with this, but on the left, Victorian glass, much more muted, much more respectable. Okay, the east window we're going to be talking about predates 1907. So this window was put in to get rid of, or arguably to get rid of, a troublesome window which was causing problems for the parish. The original window was apparently largely green with a white area around the outside, and would have looked more like this, more like the one on the right, which is still in the church today, but on the, yeah. So the original window above the altar, the east window, the largest one, consisted of 2 panels which were green with a white surround and a pattern. Get to that in a minute. This is the view down the church today, and in the period I'm interested in, there was a gallery above the door. I don't know if it still exists or if it's still got access. It might have been boarded over, but you could sit up here above where this photo was taken from and look down the full length of the church and look down on the parishioners beneath you. And the other one on the right is a very blurry photo of, but taken with a more regular lens from one end, because that's obviously a fisheye or something to make it look longer. Right behind the church, I found this. This is Jacob's Well. It's referred to as a cottage in a number of the testimonies I'm going to read. In fact, in the period in question, it was a pub, a public house, but not a very successful one. It had been a coaching inn that had fallen on hard times. And the reason it wasn't very successful is it's in Trinity Lane. And Trinity Lane is, as you will see in a moment, not very exciting and not a major thoroughfare. So I was looking up Jacob's Well and I was trying to find out something about its history. And there's a picture of Trinity Lane behind the church with the rectory on the left. And I thought, why are there so many photos? All the photos of Trinity Lane consist of people standing around in the dark, looking shifty. Is it some kind of drug dealing area? And then I worked it out. It took me a long time, actually, considering you'd have thought I would have worked this out quicker, but it's not my scene, drug dealing or this. On the right is a photo I found from the inside, and it was a group of ladies sitting around in the dark with a white teddy bear. Why would anyone sit around in the dark with a teddy bear? Can anyone guess what the answer is?
Ghost hunting.
Yes, they are ghost hunters. The people in the lane are ghost hunters, and the people who are sitting around. This device here, I suddenly realized I had seen when Steve Parsons did a presentation at ASSAP's conference this year. It's called a Boo Bear. Can anyone tell me what a Boo Bear does? And is anyone willing to embarrass themselves by explaining? Caroline, go on, you must know what it is, surely.
Yeah, I know what it is. I don't contain a Boo Bear in my items of
No,
investigative.
tell us what a Boo
equipment.
Bear is.
So a Boo Bear is the official one with the registration name. It's a type of REM pod or EMF. So that if a spirit allegedly walks near and sets off this EMF field around it, the bear then speaks to you, and it is programmed to say really cute, sweet things to try to encourage children, like, I love you. I don't know, because I've never really heard it, because I've never seen one in real life. And then it says things like cuddle me or something, I don't know, along those. It's supposed to go off when a spirit goes near it.
So it's the kind of thing that I would reprogram to say, I want to drink your blood. And other inappropriate phrases in the middle of the night. Yes. Okay, well, we have established what a Boo Bear is. So it appears that this particular building is actually its main purpose now, and this street behind the church, the setting for our ghost story, is in fact nowadays used by commercial ghost hunts for the purpose of ghost hunting. And I discovered that this group is called Lone Vigils, which didn't make much sense to me, as none of them appear to be alone. But anyway, maybe that you're never alone with a Boo Bear. So whoever they are, I'm sure they're very nice people. I'd like to ask them a few questions about Jacob's Well, the building behind the church. But our focus of interest is on this, the east window, the one on the left, or, you know, the site of the east window, because it's not the same window as the one I'm talking about, in Holy Trinity Church, Micklegate. And finally, just before we move on, the rectory is just here. And the rectory features in the story, so that's why I've included it. So, 1871, and good old Sabine is a busy man. In 1865, he began his process of writing his hymnal. And while he was writing Onward Christian Soldiers, at exactly that point in his life, he receives a letter from a friend called A.B. And A.B. has been ghost hunting in York. Now, A.B.'s not from York, but he's from Yorkshire, and he's gone to York, and he's an old friend of Sabine, and he knows Sabine loves ghost stories. So when he hears that you can see a ghost on a regular basis on Trinity Sunday, which day of the week is Trinity Sunday in 1866? Anyone know? It's a Sunday. The name is Trinity Sunday is the hint, but yeah, on Trinity Sunday every year you're meant to be able to see a ghost in a church. So he goes along and he tries to see it, and this is what happens. Here we go. Please, please, please do let me know if you can't see this. I'll put this back up so I can see you all. Hang on. Can't I see people? Oh, there we go. Okay.
While staying in York at this time last year, or perhaps a little earlier, I first heard of the apparitions or ghosts supposed to be seen in Trinity Church, Micklegate. I felt curious to see a ghost, I confess, if such a thing is to be seen without the usual concomitants of a dark night and a lone house.
Oh, can you all hear that okay? Christian, can you hear it?
I can hear it.
Good. In that case, if you can close your eyes and just try and concentrate, because it's quite complex and quite long, but it is worth it because it's also quite spooky. So he's going to church. Oh, sorry, let's go back to.
While staying in York at this time last year, or perhaps a little earlier, I first heard of the apparitions or ghosts supposed to be seen in Trinity Church, Micklegate. I felt curious to see a ghost, I confess, if such a thing is to be seen without the usual concomitants of a dark night and a lone house. Accordingly, I went to the church for morning service on a blazing hot Sunday morning in August last, with a girl about 13 years old and a little brother. The east window of the church, I must explain, is of stained glass, rather tawdry, and of no particular design, except that the colouring is much richer in the centre than at the sides, that at the extreme edge there is one pane of unstained glass which runs all round the window. The peculiarity of the apparition is that it is seen on the window itself, rather less than halfway from the bottom, as I saw it from the gallery, and has much the same effect as that of a slide drawn through a magic lantern when seen on the exhibiting sheet. The form seen, I am told invariably, is that of a figure dressed in white, walking across the window, and gives the idea of someone passing in the churchyard in a surplice. I say a figure, for the number is generally limited to one, and I was told that only on Trinity Sunday did more than one appear, and then there were 3. But I can vouch for the larger number appearing on other occasions, as the day I was there, which is one of the Sundays after Trinity, there are rarely fewer than 3 visible. The figures began to move across the window long before the commencement of the service, when in fact there is no one present but ourselves. They did so again before the service began, as well as during the Venite, and subsequently as many as 20 or 30 times, I should suppose, till the conclusion of the sermon. Of the 3 figures, 2 were evidently those of women, and the third was a little child. The 2 women were very distinct in appearance. One was tall, very graceful, and the other middle-sized. We called the second one the nursemaid, from her evident care of the child during the absence of the mother, which relationship we attributed to the tall one from the passionate affection she exhibited towards the child, her caressing it, and the wringing of her hands over it. I must add that each figure is perfectly distant from the others, and after they have been seen once or twice are at once recognisable. The order of their proceedings, with slight variation, was this. The mother came alone from the north side of the window, and having gone about halfway across, stopped, turned round, and waved her aunt towards the quarter where she had come. This signal was answered by the entry of the nurse with the child. Both figures then bent over the child, and seemed to bemoan its fate, but the taller one was always the most endearing in her gestures. The mother then moved towards the other side of the window, taking the child with her, leaving the nurse in the centre of the window, from which she gradually retired towards the north corner whence she had come, waving her hand, as though making signs of farewell as she retreated. After some little time, she again appeared, bending forward, and evidently anticipating the return of the other 2, who never failed to reappear from the south side of the window where they disappeared. The same gestures of despair and distress were repeated, then all 3 retired together toward the north side of the window. Usually they appeared during the musical portions of the service, and especially during one 8-line hymn when, for the only occasion without the child, the 2 women rushed on, in stage phrase, and remained during the whole hymn, making the most frantic gestures of despair. Indeed, the louder the music in that hymn, the more carried away their grief did they seem to be. Nothing could be more emphatic than the individuality of the several figures. The manner of each had its own peculiarity. I do not doubt that if the stained glass were removed, a much plainer view would be obtained. I think so, because the nearer the centre of the window, where the stained glass was thickest, there the less distinct were the forms. It was like catching glimpses of them through leaves. But nearer the edge of the window, where the colours were less white, they were perfectly distinct, and still more so on the pane of unstained glass at the edge. There they seemed most clear, and gave one the impression of being real persons, not shadows. Indeed, by far the most remarkable and perplexing incident in the whole spectacle was this, that on one occasion, when the mother and child had taken their departure, the medium figure, the nurse, waved her hands, and after walking very slowly to the edge of the window, turned round whilst on the pane of unstained glass, and waved her arm towards the other two with what one would call a stage gesture, and that I most distinctly saw, and emphatically declare I did see, the arm bare nearly to the shoulder, with beautiful folds of white drapery hanging from it, like a picture on a Greek vase. Nothing could be plainer than the drag of the robes on the ground after the figures, as they retired at the edge of the window where the clear glass was, previous to going out. The impression produced was that one saw real persons in the churchyard, for though the figures were seen at the window, yet they gave.
Okay, something clearly went wrong at that point. Okay, so we get the idea. So first thing first, hang on. How do I put my video back on? There we go. Anyone got any questions or points they'd like to make so far? I mean, you all heard the account, and it's quite hard to follow, isn't it? But basically what's happening is behind the window, review, no, record slideshow from current slide, there we go. Behind the window of two green panes, which used to stand here with white edges, transparent sections around them. So both the two windows, that one and that one, were originally green with a central pane of pattern, and the edges were transparent so you could see through. There were two trees behind, as there are indeed now, and the figures were seen. Now, the first thing that any modern skeptic would say was it's a reflection from gas lamps. There weren't any gas lamps within the area when it was first seen. They weren't down Trinity Lane, was unlit. Or it was car headlights, which unfortunately doesn't really work in 1865. The houses behind are the rectory, which is off to the left. So it's off over here. It's the big square building I showed you. And on the other side of the wall, Jacob's Well. And there's a kind of workshop on this side. So there's a couple of what are referred to as the cottages across. But people who are sitting in the gallery above here at this end, above where we're looking from, are the only people who can see the apparition. And the reason I've got the two pictures is this one has been taken with a lens that makes the church look much longer and gives an impression of size. But in fact, it's not that long a church. This one on the right gives you a better idea of what your viewpoint would be from above. But it's still quite a distance. Now, if you assume that the figures in the window now are life size, which I think we can assume, the figures they are seeing running backwards and forwards are very highly visible considering the distance. They are describing flowing robes. They sound more like animations. So any suggestions as to how that could be caused?
Not so much suggestion about the causation, but maybe the observation, which is if people in the gallery can see the figures moving across the window, what is the difference in height got to do with this? Maybe it's because of the angle, and that is if you're looking down and across from the gallery, then you can see something out of the window that those within the body of the church cannot, because there is a difference in height between the floor of the church and the ground outside.
Yeah, I mean, everyone says it looks like a figure in a white surplice, which is just a white robe or a white, it has sleeves, but it's a white thing you wear in church services. I can find a picture of one. I have got one, but I forgot to put it in the slides. But it looks like a real person just walking around the back of the church. And there is a 30 or 40 foot area at this time behind the church with two elm trees, which we can see by going back to here. And the elm trees are right up against the window. So is it possible that what they're seeing is, I mean, they say they can't actually see it through the trees in the middle of summer. That's one of the reasons why it's less visible in high summer, is because the trees block the view of the ghosts. But they are saying that the ghosts were seen walking down here behind the trees, as if they were real people walking backwards and forwards. Now, if you were at the bottom of the church sitting in a pew, there's no way you could see that. You would have to be up here in the gallery, which looks down, where you had a look, where you could see diagonally down into the body of the church. And it's only from the gallery that you could actually see the apparitions. So yeah, you're completely right. It's because of their positioning that that's why they can't be seen from the ground. Anyone else? I am going to read some more in a moment, but I'm just breaking it up because otherwise it will be really tedious, because they're long passages of narrative description where people give in evidence.
CJ, like the hat.
Yeah. Hi, Ed.
Hi, CJ. Right. Yeah. When you said figures moving up and down, you mentioned the elm trees. And you said that are they sure that it's not shadows caused by light passing through the branches of the trees and the trees moving around?
Right. So what happens is the vicar originally is quite sympathetic and doesn't mind the Sunday school children joking about it and people pointing it out and stuff. But eventually he works out that that when the church gets really busy, which it does every Trinity Sunday and the weeks around it, it's not because of the quality of his preaching. It's actually because people have come to see the ghosts. And eventually he decides that this is a spiritual problem. Originally, he didn't mind the ghosts, but he becomes increasingly annoyed that people are not coming to church to praise God, but are coming to church to see the ghosts. So as a result of that, he decides that he's going to have to do something about it. Being a man of science, his first thought is going to be something to do with the trees. So he tries different experiments, and his choice is quite simple. He gets the sexton to go out with an axe and chop them down. So the trees are cut down and burnt. There are no trees. He clears the whole garden down to the wall, and all that means is that people can see the figures more. They see the figures better now they're not obscured, which implies also that the figures were not in the trees, but were not in the glass, sorry, or reflections. Now, inside, there were 4 lights, and I believe that they were of the type that were common in the period, which consisted of, you're going to hate me for going on about 19th century church architecture here, but never mind. Imagine 4 balls suspended from chains, either in a row, in a line, or in a circle. 2 of them slightly darker shades, more opaque than the others, and 2 of them transparent. That's what were hanging up there above the altar. So because there was because the lights were hanging up here, the suggestion was that the white figures were just reflections. Now, that would require the lights to be swinging quite visibly for them to move. And did you notice how detailed the description are? How there's the mother, the nursemaid, and the child. The apparitions or the lights they're seeing take on different names, and they're convinced they're not seeing glowing lights. They're not seeing mysterious shining. They claim to be seeing figures where they can actually see quite clearly, dress and exaggerated mannerisms. And that's one of the most peculiar things about it, because if they are apparitions, they are exuberant, flamboyant. They are waving their arms about. They are showing deep grief. They're really getting into it, these ghosts, yeah, in a manner that you might expect from a Victorian melodrama or a silent production, but which doesn't seem very realistic. So that leads to the obvious question: is somebody faking it? And there's a whole period in this. There's a whole selection of hauntings in this period which are faked. There's one in the north of York 10 years earlier, where a strange white figure with horns appears at night and keeps manifesting and chasing children. And eventually they come to the conclusion that it's a 10-year-old boy who's wearing a cow skin, a Frisian cow skin, putting some horns on his head and going woo and running down the street making hooting noises. And that's what's caused the whole panic. But by the time they work it out, there's crowds of hundreds of people gathering and throwing stones at the house where the ghost is believed to be and breaking every window in it and rioting in the streets. And it is a common factor throughout history. And you might find this hard to believe, but even into the 1970s, even into the 2000s, even as little as 4 years ago in Northern Ireland, where you have a haunting that is publicly known, large crowds of people often gather outside, drink, and shout, as I've heard them shout, woo ghosties. Now, when you're in a supposedly haunted house and a group of people gather outside shouting "woo ghosties" and throwing stones at the windows, it is not a great start to an investigation. In fact, we called the police on that occasion and left quietly out the back. But it happens, it does happen still to this day. I don't know if any of you have experienced, actually, have any of you experienced that? Been on an investigation or been on a case when suddenly, you know, hundreds of people have turned up and started to shout and shine torches at the house? It even happened, it happened at Enfield, it happened, though to a lesser extent, but there was a few occasions where the police had to move on crowds. It happens at Borley on a regular basis. It happens all the time in cases, and it has done throughout history. But in the Victorian era, ghost stories often led to rioting. And the famous February the 24th haunting in St Mary's Churchyard, the great churchyard, Bury St Edmunds, led to severe civil disorder every year, to the point where they would have the militia on standby. And to this day, the police go down and stand around to move on Ghostbusters. There you go. So there you go. What are ghost hunters? A threat to public order. You never heard, you must have all heard my story of the Prestbury riot, maybe not. Let's move on to the next part of this story and then we can solve this mystery. The building still stands, the archives are there. I've been on the British Newspaper Archive and read the newspaper articles. They are very clear. Dear Mr. Baring-Gould, South Parade, York, March 22nd, 1871. I promised to send you an account of the ghost at Holy Trinity, Micklegate, and I now forward you the enclosed, written by a friend on whose word you may perfectly reply. I heard another account a few days ago from a lady. She saw it on Sunday the 19th last. She described the figure, because she saw only one, as being dressed in a shining white garment and said it crossed the east window twice, with a slightly skipping step. It appeared to be outside the church, as she saw it distinctly through the stained glass. I've never seen it myself, though I've been several times to the church. There are 4 lights by the east window, and the glass of the 2 central lights is of a darker tint than that in the side ones. There are, however, narrow panes of transparent glass in each of the lights, so that a person passing outside the window could be distinctly seen by anyone sitting in the west gallery. The sill of the east window is 5 foot from the ground outside and 7 foot from the pavement inside, about 10 yards from the east wall separating the churchyard from the private garden. Yours very truly, RT. Well, this is the picture pretty much, 30 foot from the end to the wall. Trees originally there, cut down by Vicar. 7 foot, as Kieran said, up to the window sill, which blocks the line of sight. Okay, next account. Having heard from several people at the ghost at the Church of Holy Trinity, Micklegate, York, on Sunday at the end of September 1869, a friend and myself made up our minds to go and see if we could be favoured with a sight of this wonderful apparition. So as you can see, the vicar was right. People were just turning up to see the ghosts. Why hasn't the Church of England actually knocked up some Pepper's ghost machines? You think how easy it would be to get the pews filled with worshippers on a Sunday if ghosts miraculously manifested. It would definitely be a way to get them in. Much more successful than the Ilford course. Anyway, when we went up to the gallery, the only place whence they say it's to be seen, you may perhaps already know that the gallery faces the east window, which is filled with modern stained glass. Modern in this case means 1834. I'm afraid that our attention somewhat rambled during the service, for we were looking out for the ghostly visitants. However, we watched and watched as we began to think in vain, until at the end of the second lesson, just before the beginning of the Jubilate Deo, I saw a figure, I should say of a shortish woman with something white folded over her, covering even her head and face, but still I could see what it was. The figure appeared to walk very fast across the 2 middle lights of the east window from right to left, i.e. from south to north, and seemed to be at some distance from the window. The strange thing is, I saw it quite clearly through the thickly painted glass. The whole thing happened so suddenly and really surprised me so much that I could for some reason hardly get up from my seat or find my place at the beginning of the chant. Just as it disappeared, my friend said, "Did you see that?" Which goes to show that 19th century ghost hunters predate Most Haunted. There is nothing new under the sun, but did you see that? It was a classic event line. To which I, of course, answered, yes, did you? That was all we saw. And the lady who was there at the same time, who we knew, saw it also, exactly as we did, only apparently not with the same distinctiveness. Many persons have seen a great deal more. I believe the figure is generally seen to walk across the window in the reverse way to which my friend and I saw, and returns with a child, some say with two. We examined outside the window. It's a good deal above the ground, about 5 foot outside, I should think, and at the side of it is a very old gravestone with no inscription on the headstone as far as I can make out. I believe it's currently reported that the apparition rises from that grave. Some people thought it might be a shadow caused in a peculiar manner by the trees that grew outside, but it was not, for the trees were cut down 3 years ago, and the apparition is still seen, as it has been, I am told, for a century. I have nothing to add except this is a true and unexaggerated account of what I saw. Okay, jump in. Anyone else got any thoughts after that?
What I can't get my head around is everybody that's seen the ghost, from what you're saying, please confirm if this is the case, were inside the church.
Yes.
Nobody was outside the church.
No.
Which begs the question, as you say earlier, of hoaxes, in the sense that if there's some kind of refractory kind of case with the windows as they were, which distorts what can be seen outside, why would you not expect hoaxes every year to turn up and do something if there's nobody outside to check? That's the thing that I find missing from this.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. I'll read a bit more and we'll see if we cover that possibility in a moment. It's just reminded me of something, actually. Pentecost. It was Pentecost Sunday, not Trinity Sunday, and it was pouring down with rain. I'd set out to see my friend Dave Curtin. He had an essay that was due in, and as often when David had an essay to do, he would ask me to come over and just proofread it for him and keep him company while he finished it, and he'd send it off. It's always nice to have somebody else sit around. So I went over to see DC. I don't know if DC's here tonight. Is he here? Can anyone see him? Anyway, Dave, if you're here, say hi. And as I was walking down to his house, I set off in reasonable weather. Wasn't wearing a coat, and halfway across North Place car park in Cheltenham, it absolutely threw it down. I mean, it was rain like rain I had not experienced in years. And rather than run to the Cotswold, the pub where I used to go and play the pub quiz every Thursday night, I started to do the webinars. For some reason, I've got no idea why, because they are my mortal theological enemies, I ran to Holy Trinity Church in Cheltenham, a very different Trinity to this one. And it's a charismatic church. And when I went in, they were praising God. And luckily, there's, almost 1,000 strong, the congregation. There's no problem at all with me just slipping in at the back and finding a chair and just kind of waiting to dry off and planning to escape again during the sermon or whatever. And suddenly, while they were singing and praising God, and I was kind of being my cynical high Anglican self and thinking, well, whatever, it's all good, and trying to be kind of cheerful and positive and soaking wet at the same time and slightly cynical. A beautiful dove, and not a dove with an olive branch in its mouth like the ark one, but just a dove, came flying down over the altar. And as it flew down, it had its beak down and its wings outstretched and its head turned sideways. And I recognize it now as being the iconography of St. Gregory. I wouldn't have known that at the time, but it's also the iconography of the Holy Spirit descending. And I thought it was an amazing special effect because it was so real. And I actually was fascinated enough, the rain carried on, I stuck out the rest of the service, and they had some lights and they had some flashy things, but they didn't have any holograms, and I was disappointed they didn't do it again. So I went and I asked the lighting tech, and he said, what do you mean? There was no dove. And I said, yes, there was. And he said, no, there wasn't. And to be honest, I spoke to half a dozen of the ministry team that day, and I'm pretty sure they weren't having me on. And it was like a religious experience devoid of any religious content, because I saw the symbol, but didn't feel the spirit, which is, bizarre. But it was the Holy Spirit descending like a dove on. And when I got to DC's, it was him who actually told me that it was Pentecost Sunday. I hadn't realised because I turned up, 1 hour, 20 minutes into a 1 hour 30 service. But yeah, so strange things do happen in churches. That was a religious experience. That was a definite Christian religious experience. And I felt it was quite a powerful one. And actually, it moved me quite a lot once DC told me it was Pentecost. And especially as it happened on a church where I don't normally set foot. So it was a bit of a bizarre experience. But to get back to this experience, we're dealing with a situation where the ghosts have been seen by many people. And unlike my experience, where it was a personal spiritual experience, I saw the thing and believed it was a real thing. These people saw the thing, but they shared the experience. York, March 28th, 1874. Sir, owing to severe illness in my family, I was not able to reply to your note earlier. I will now try and tell you what I have seen and been told on the subject of ghosts at Holy Trinity Church, Micklegate. A York lady, now dead, tells me she remembered seeing it when she was a child, and she once read an account of it in an old history of York. I think the book must have been published in the 17th century. We live in the parish of Holy Trinity and attend the church regularly. Part of my family sits in the gallery, therefore I will tell you it's a matter of fact and manner as possible what I myself have seen, and leave one of my daughters, if she likes, to give you her experience. I must state also that the ghost is seen more or less distinctly as you happen to be seated in the central side of the gallery. As a rule, the centre is the best place. As I have no faith in ghosts, I've been most wishful to have the matter cleared up. At present, I cannot account for the appearance in any way. I went many times to the gallery in the hope of seeing the phenomenon, but was repeatedly disappointed. At last, one dull day, hopeless for the purpose as I thought, rain was falling at the time, I was startled by seeing something. There are two east windows, one on the right filled with common green glass, the organ in front of it. From outside of this window I saw something move, and immediately a graceful figure of a girl of 18 or 20 years crossed the outside of the stained east window with a light, free step. She was entirely covered with a fine lace veil, which, as she walked and met the air, showed the outline of her head and figures. The features I could not distinguish, but I could see a shade through the veil where they would naturally be. The veil was of pure white, flowing back as a train as she walked, so like a bride. In 2 or 3 minutes, the figure returned, the robe flowing back in the same way, and disappeared behind the organ window. So towards where the grave is. The figure appeared to me to be decidedly outside the window and at a greater distance than it was possible for anyone to be. In the first place, because the east window is high up, and therefore anyone walking past it to be seen at all must be at least some little distance from it. And secondly, because there's a dead wall within a few yards of the window. Well, it's 10 yards, but yeah. The pure white of the robe quite obliterated the colours in the window, but the leadwork was distinct enough, and the figure appeared behind it. The most distinct outline of the figure is most striking. The apparition always returns to the organ window. I've seen this several times since the first. Owing to the dull day and the darkness of the windows, the appearance on the first occasion was the most remarkable. 2 or 3 other figures also appear, but I never thought them as distinct as the first. I thought the second or the third might be reflections of the first. The 2 or 3 often moved backwards and forwards with a dancing motion, something like the reflection of the sun on the wall, but taking the form of human figures. However, it was dull and raining when I first saw the apparition, so on that occasion there could have been no reflection of sunlight. These appearances are sometimes not seen for weeks and months. Then they appear once or twice on succeeding days or on Sundays. No one can be sure of seeing them if they go to the church for that purpose. I do not believe the apparition takes place at one more favoured time than another, though some people like to think so. The present rector wished to abolish the ghosts and was advised to cut down the trees. This was done. All thought the ghosts were banished. 10 months after, there was a gay wedding. Not that kind of a gay wedding. And my daughters went into the gallery to witness the ceremony. And lo, the ghost or ghosts were there also. They had not been seen for 9 or 10 months. That was the first occasion since the cutting down of the trees on which they reappeared. The Sunday school children who sit in the gallery see the form so often as to be quite familiar with the sight and call them the mother, nurse and child. The legend I have heard told is that they are a family consisting of a father, mother and only child who lived here once upon a time. The father died and was buried at the east end of the church under or near the organ window. After a while, the plague broke out in York and carried off the child, and it was buried outside the city, as those who died of plague were not allowed to be laid in the churchyards for fear of communicating the infection. The mother died later and was laid in her husband's grave, and now, as in her lifetime, continues to visit the grave of her child and bemoan their separation. The child is brought up from its grave in the plague pit by the mother and nurse, and brought to the grave of the father, and then is taken back to where it lies outside the walls. LS. Okay, so now we have a legend to explain it as well. What do people think? Anyone tell me what the time is now, by the way, because it's getting a bit late.
It's 2 minutes past 8. So the legend, is this a story that's actually explains the actual origin, or is one that's been like a backstory that's been created to explain the
I
origin?
think it's a backstory that was developed. I mean, you know, because of the figures are called by the Sunday school children, the mother, the nurse, and the child. So they need to have those three characters in the story. So I think the story develops later, but we don't know. Let's move on to 1874 and do one more. Newcastle Daily Chronicle. So this is after the publication of his book, a few years later. On Good Friday last, I went to Holy Trinity Church, York, at morning service, 11 o'clock, and repaired with a friend to the gallery, being anxious to see a certain apparition which is said to haunt the place. As you can see, the vicar's plan of stopping people coming to just go ghost hunting was not working, was it? The gallery is situated at the extreme west end of the building and faces the east window, from which it's distant 50 feet or so. It's said that in the aisle and body of the church, nothing is ever seen. The gallery was full, but no one seemed to have come there to see the ghost. Though many of them afterwards said they saw it, they were not in the least affected by it, treating it as a matter of course to which they were all well accustomed. I kept my eyes fixed on the east window for nearly the whole of the hour and a half during which the service lasted, but was not favoured with a sight of the phenomenon, although others saw it cross the window and return, and my friend, who knows it well, called my attention to the fact at that moment, yet I could still perceive nothing. I therefore left the place as unbelieving as ever, and supposed that I was either the victim of a hoax, or it required a great stretch of imagination to fancy a passing shadow was the desired object. However, not liking to discredit the statements of so many friends who were used to seeing it almost every Sunday, I consented on Easter Day to go to the same place and pew. The seat I occupied was not an advantageous one, a large brass chandelier being between me and the lower panes of the window. In the middle of the service, my eyes, which had hardly once moved from the left or north side of the window, were attracted by a bright light formed like a female, robed and hooded, passing from north to south with a rapid gliding motion outside the church, apparently at some distance. The window is Gothic, and I fancy from 20 to 25 foot high and from 12 to 15 foot wide at the base. The panes through which the ghost shines are some 5 foot high and about halfway between top and bottom. There are 4 divisions in the window, all of stained glass. I'll skip a bit because this is just a very detailed description of the window. Through this rim, especially, can be seen what looks like a form transparent, but yet thick, if such a light could be used, with light. It did not resemble linen, for instance, but was far brighter and would no doubt have been dazzling to a near observer. The robe was long and trailed on the ground. The figure was, of course, not visible when it had crossed the window and passed behind the wall. My friend whispered to me that it would must return at the end of 5 minutes or so. The same figure glided back from right to left, having turned round while out of sight. Half an hour later, it passed from north to south and remained 10 seconds only, returned with what I believe to be the figure of a young child, stopped at the last pane but one, where both vanished. I did not see the child again, but a few seconds later, the woman reappeared, completed the passage behind the last pane very rapidly. Nothing more was seen during the service, and no other opportunity presented itself to me for making observations. Each time the chandelier prevented me from obtaining a complete view, but there could be no doubt as to the shape, a certain amount of indistinctiveness caused by the stained glass. On the reappearance for the last time, I saw the head, which I was, I believe, of a child, move up and down distinctly as if nodding. The figure shone with dazzling brightness and appeared to be at a considerable distance, 30 yards or so, though at the same time as distinct as possible considering the obstruction of coloured glass. Each time the level on which it glided was precisely the same, and afterwards I sat looking through the glass where the feet of the figure shone, and continuing that line in my mind's eye with all the objects before me except the ghost, I found it would traverse a thick holly bush some 8 or 9 foot high, about 4 foot from the ground, and 2 to 3 foot from the ground, a low wall about 4 foot high, and would reach the ground itself in the middle of a gravel yard belonging to the back premises of the house called the vicarage, 12 or 15 yards from the window. Any person walking between the window and holly tree would barely be seen at all from inside, much less be seen in the place where the apparition occupies. And anyone on the further side of the tree would be almost, if not completely, invisible on account of the holly and other bushes and the wall. Anyone there at all could easily be seen by many houses on all sides. So that's important. Firstly, this person's saying that the figure is actually apparently walking in the air. It cannot be walking where it's walking because it would walk through a holly bush. Secondly, they're claiming that they think it's about 4 foot above the ground. But the most important bit here, possibly, is the fact that they're saying that it's overlooked by a large number of houses, the rectory, the Jacob's Well, the cottage. All of those people around would see anyone who was dressing up in white and running around in that area. So again, we're back to, was it a reflection of some kind? But if so, why was it not solved by endless attempts by the vicar and others who spent large amounts of time? The vicar himself and his family spent many hours moving around the gallery trying to see it and trying to work out the trick and could never locate him. Anyway, the next bit of his account. If it was a shadow thrown upon the window of the glass, it would of course be seen by those who sit in the body of the church as well as those in the gallery. It cannot be a reflection on the principle of Pepper's ghost, which is produced by the figure actually being in very strong light and appearing reflected on the glass in a darkish spot. The lights on the inside and outside of the church at York, which might be thought to produce a ghost, are precisely the reverse, and any figure required to be reproduced by reflection on the east window would have to be standing or walking in the centre of the aisle, because the lights are reflected from the bright area to the dark area in a Pepper's ghost to project it onto the glass. For the above facts I can vouch, and I have no reason to believe the following are either incorrect or exaggerated. It's said to occur very frequently on Trinity Sunday and to bring 2 other figures onto the scene, another female called the nurse and the child. It's often seen distinctly on a dark, rainy or snowy day, as when the sun is shining. When I saw it, the sun was not very bright. The motion is even, not at all jerky. Sometimes it glides swiftly, at other times slowly. It cannot be a mere accidental reflection from a door or window, for the figure faces different ways according to the direction it's going. It's not always alone, nor do the figures act in concert. One of my friends with a companion watched outside from the wall, where he had a full view of the whole place during the morning service. The ghost was seen from the inside, while outside nothing was visible. So yes, people sat outside looking for the ghost, and there was no ghost. It's said to have haunted a church for 150, 200, and some authorities say 300 years, and there are many pretty legends connected with it. One of the many traditions says 300 years ago, during religious disturbances, a party of soldiers came to sack the convent attached to the church, that the abbess, a woman of great virtue and courage, stopped them as they were entering, declaring they should enter over her dead body only, and that should they succeed in their sacrilegious purpose, as they afterwards did, her spirit would haunt the place until the true church was re-established and a convent built upon the same spot. So it's a murdered abbess who wants to recreate a Catholic convent there. Or, next to legend, another story relates that during the plague 200 years ago, a nurse and child died of the pestilence and were buried outside the city walls. The unfortunate mother of the child was interred in Holy Trinity churchyard. Here she waits and receives the nurse and child, weeping and wringing her hands before parting with them. It's sometimes enacted several times during the same day and even during the same service. Whatever may have been the circumstances under which the ghost, if it is one, which is hard to believe in these matter-of-fact days, commenced its peculiar promenade, I would recommend those who have the chance to go to Holy Trinity Church, York, and see for themselves, though an audience of the apparition cannot always be assured. A ghost in broad daylight does no harm, frightens no one, and ought to interest everybody. HGFT. Wow. Okay. So that tells you a little bit more information, and we're coming to an end now. Only a couple more bits, short bits to read, but you're getting the overall picture. So what do people think of the Micklegate mystery? You see, the problem is that it goes on from at least, we know for a fact it was happening in the late 1850s, early 1860s, and it continues until the vicar manages to get his way and have the window replaced in 1906.
Was it the same vicar throughout?
No, there was a whole series of vicars.
Mm.
The vicar of Trinity then intervened in 1880 and said, I think the time has come when it's perhaps necessary to give a word of explanation in regard to this imaginary apparition. The fact is simply this: anyone seated in the gallery of the church, which is at the west end, can see through the east end any person or persons walking in the vicarage garden. The wall at the east end of the church, below the east window, is too high to allow anybody in the body of the church to see the garden or anyone in it. This fact explains at once the reason and how it's absolutely necessary for anyone to be in the gallery to see the ghost. This is the real truth of the matter. What is seen is not the ghost, it is the reflection, but it is a living being or beings walking in a garden. Of course, the east window being of stained glass and a rather peculiar pattern, a distinct form is not always visible. And I may say this simple explanation has been attested and verified over and over again, both by myself and others. One argument of proof is all I think I need to give. The vicarage house was at one time empty for 12 months, during which time the ghost was neither seen nor heard of, and then it was let to a person with a large family. And on the very first Sunday after the family took possession of the premises, I was told by a simple-minded youth that the ghost had returned, on 5 or 6 young ghosts with it. After what I've here stated, I hardly need to say that all the sensational matter in regard to vivid lights, mother, nurse, child, extraordinary displays on Trinity Sunday, and so on, is as pure an invention as was ever fabricated by a morbid imagination. And I will add that I sincerely hope the people of York will not take advice of one of your voluminous correspondences and will not go to the church for the mere purpose of seeing this purely imaginative ghost. I trust that all who will go will remember it is God's house, intended to be a house of prayer and not a place for gratifying an idle curiosity. This did not impress poor Sabine, who by this time was being vilified for having created a modern supernatural horror in the local church. And the vicar wrote to him, that was the letter from the vicar to him, telling him to knock it off. This, however, managed to get, it was published in the paper, and Mr. HGFT replied, I've read Mr. Gould's account since I first saw the ghost, and I find they differ considerably in the detail from my description. In the essential points they agree with and corroborate it, however. I should like to state here that the story was not adapted from my own or any other purpose from Yorkshire oddities, but is unprejudiced and, to the best of my belief, an unexaggerated and true account and description of what myself and others have seen. It is not my desire to raise a discussion, but the injustice implied in the letter is the excuse I urge you for trespassing upon your space. So somebody writing in defence of Sabine. And then another letter, Newcastle on Tyne, 6th May 1876. So 20 years on. Sir, I was in York when the letters appeared in the Chronicle and the Journal about the ghosts in Holy Trinity Church. A lady, a member of the congregation who frequently sees the ghost, gave me the following simple explanation. Opposite the window, there's a cottage, in one of the windows of which is a swing pane of glass. The tenants of the cottage can cause the ghost to appear and disappear at pleasure by simply opening and shutting it, thus causing reflected sunlight to fall on the church window. I am, and so forth, JL. So now we have two competing explanations. One of them is that the vicarage children are being seen running around out here playing, which is an unusual thing for children for a vicarage to be doing during Holy Communion. Normally, they would be in church with their papa. However, possibly that's some explanation, but there is at least one occasion, and it's implied many, when people watched outside for the ghosts and saw none. So if we discount the vicarage explanation as the vicar who eventually destroys the window being keen to get rid of it, we then have the problem of, could it be the cottage window? Well, one thing I discovered in Victorian ghost stories in newspapers is that they are invariably explained away. And much like explanations like black mold or earthquakes or whatever people come up with nowadays to explain away a haunting, the explanations rarely make much sense. And in this case, we've already been told that reflections don't account for it. But if they do, then the window has been doing this for a very long time. And it's peculiar that if it's a reflection, it's only seen from above. It's much more likely that it's the children from the vicarage, as was supposed. Finally, May the 9th, 1876. Sir, though I am not one of those who can boast of having seen the York ghost, yet even to me the explanation published in today's journal in a letter signed JL is utterly inadequate to explain the matter. The fact of a swing window opening and shutting might throw sunlight on the church window, but it is perfectly clear in this case the reflection would not be confined perpetually to its same identical part of the window. The angles caused by the sun and the swing window, of course, being varied according to the time of day when it strikes it. Therefore, by these means, the figures could not be reversed on their return, as is always the case according to the story. Also, the apparition seen in dull weather, when no sunbeam could be reflected. If the light was actually turned onto the stained glass, the congregation seated in the body of the church would be able to see it as well as those in the gallery, but they do not. I should like to see the matter reasonably explained, yet to give a reason such as J.L. gives for it is altogether unsatisfactory, and may be taken for what it is worth, which is not much, considering the evidence against him, and the fact his information is only second-hand. I am, and so forth, R.H.H. Quite a harsh rebuttal from someone who thought about the basic physics. And another letter, is getting late, so I'll stop soon. 1875, August 11th, M. Rectory, York. Dear Sir, having had the pleasure of reading your interesting book Yorkshire Oddities, I recognise an old acquaintance in the Trinity coast. Happening to have found out the apparent explanation of the ghost, I thought you'd be interested in hearing what I know about it. In 1869, I went to school at Mr. Metcalfe's, the present incumbent of the parish. For the first year, I saw and heard nothing about the ghost. We used to sit in 2 pews in the body of the church under the gallery. In 1870, we changed to a pew in the front of the gallery and the one behind it. Soon after we changed our seats, some of us saw the ghost, and the next Sunday we looked for it, and most of us saw it. The attempt was made known to find out what the ghost was. In 1871, my curiosity being rather excited by the frequent appearances of the ghost, I and a boy by the name of Udall determined to find out what it was. The appearance of the ghost was, as one of your informants described it, of a figure in a surplice, which went across to the window from left to right, then returned from right to left. The east window is a patterned window of a good deal of red and blue glass, and behind the window there's a small strip of churchyard and then a wall. Beyond the wall is the yard of the old parsonage house. On the left side of this yard is the parsonage, which is rented to a few poor families who take in lodgers. On the other side are the officers. And there's a picture which he draws, which I can share in a moment. As we used to teach at the Sunday school, what you've seen the photos, you know the layout, which was held in a large room jutting out from the parsonage towards the church, which is just where, if from the view of the picture on the screen at the moment, that's from the Sunday school, basically. We often noticed the women and children of the house going across the yard to the ash pits, which are the far side of the church, and it struck us this might be the ghost. We went into the church directly the doors were opened and went up to the gallery while one of us walked across the churchyard in front of the east window. Curiously enough, at the same time we saw him going across the window at the bottom, the ghost went across higher up. So I've forgotten to state the ghost has always been seen in sunny weather, but it can be seen in cloudy weather as well as bright sunshine. Usually 1 ghost appeared, but I've seen 2 and a few times many as 3. This was, I suppose, the husband and wife of one of the families surrounded by the children. In 1862, Mr. Saul was the incumbent, but upon his death, the vacation of the living, the parsonage house was uninhabited. During this time, I've been told, the church was delivered from the ghost, but the very first Sunday the new rector came, the ghost reappeared. The name has not been given. So the explanation that is being offered here appears to be that there was some kind of reflection, yet all of the experiments that were conducted, and they were conducted, and a number of people from York, and you can go and read the newspaper. If you go to the British Newspaper Archives, I'm not going to read anymore because it's getting so late, but you get the idea. Everybody engaged in quite meticulous calculations, and there are sightline drawings, and there are drawings to show that it cannot be on the other side of the wall, as some people suggested, and there are drawings to show that it cannot be a reflection, and there are drawings which give the angle of the sun. And I even went to the trouble of trying to work out where the sun would be in relation to the church on Trinity Sunday. But of course, you need to know the exact time of the service on Trinity Sunday. And it seems to be the 11 o'clock service, by which time the sun would be down to the south. So the sun would be over the other side of Micklegate, facing down towards, Nottingham and uncivilized places like that, rather than York. So the wilds of Leicester and the savage land of London and those other strange places outside of York. But no, jokes aside, the figure does not appear to have been a reflection. Right. Okay, it's late. what are we going to do? How can we investigate this haunting? Suggestions. I'm going to throw it open to everyone. Caroline, can you mediate? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Right,
there are a few questions in the chat. Do you want me to go through them?
yeah, go through them, but we'll kind of let people jump in as well if they have questions. And I'm going to stop sharing this now.
That was incredible, actually. And there was a lot of investigative work already carried out by members of the people in the congregation, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of M.R. James. It reminds me of that kind of Victorian ghost story. It reminds me of gaslight horror stories. I think there's a great Cthulhu scenario waiting there, Mike. But yeah, but it's the question of how you render it interesting, and that has to be the backstory, not the just going to church and seeing funny things out of a window. Ghosts need to have some explanation to be interesting. I think ghosts otherwise make very dull stories. Anyway, moving on. So anyone, let's go for it.
One other thing I was going to say is that I felt that when you mentioned the different types of glass at the beginning, the Victorian and the medieval glass, and I always thought that was when you started saying about references to the windows later on. I almost felt that was more like almost like a Chekhov's gun, as it were. That was you were using
right, except for the fact that the window that was there at the time was 1834.
Yeah. Okay. Fair
So
enough.
it would have been Victorian glass as well, just early Victorian. Well, just post Regency, isn't it? When's the Regency end? About 1825, something like that.
1830. The Regency, 1820.
Yeah, 1820. That's what I thought. So yeah, Georgian glass. Well, Victoria comes to the throne in 35, doesn't she?
37.
37, right. So it is just pre-Victorian, yeah, Georgian glass. But it was just a pattern piece of glass of a type that was common at the time. There's also quite a discrepancy. One letter refers to it as red and blue, and the other letter refers to all of the other references are that it's green. But I think the explanation there is that you've got green panes with a red and blue intricate kind of knotwork around them, and then a transparent edge. I tried to avoid, I mean, I'm not actually an enthusiast for church architecture, but I've read many books on the subject over the years while doing things and researching things. So I tried to sort of stay off the subject of church architecture as much as possible. Yeah. And did you think my hat was quite appropriate? It was, wasn't it? My ghost hunting hat was actually quite useful for this occasion. I did find the fact that when I was looking up pictures of Trinity Lane, there were the dodgy looking people hanging around in the dark. And then when I recognised that thing they had sitting inside the thing was a Boo Bear, I do wonder what the supposed hauntings of Jacob's Well are. Do we have anyone in York who's able to go and make some inquiries? Is Hannah still here? She might have fled. No, she's gone.
Karen Kelsall said outside his house in Horbury is a blue plaque. I don't know if anyone was interested in that. A Yorkshire White Rose.
Okay. Yeah.
But does that mean that you live near there, Karen? Karen says yes. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I do. I live about 2 miles away. 2 miles away from Albury.
Yeah, near where he wrote Onward Christian Soldiers. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a blue plaque outside the house where he used to, and where he wrote it in that house as well. And it says on there about Onward Christian Soldiers. So I can't talk. Onward Christian Soldiers on the blue plaque. I'm going back years ago now, mind. Yeah. If you go to Kurgat Station, you got Wakefield Westgate and you got Kurgat. If you go to Kurgat, does your head in, you go down the tunnel, that's all you can hear. Either that or Jerusalem, and they played both Yorkshire songs. Ilkimore Bar Tat as well. So if you go to Albury, you'll see the blue plaque.
Okay. And I remember not to go on Ilkimore without a hat on, as I have one, luckily, because I don't want to end up being food for worms. I know the song, even though I'm not a Yorkshireman. The clarity of the figures would be less defined by the nature of the stained glass. Yeah. Altar party, choir practice, local rowdies. In the back garden of the church and the vicarage.
All good parties happen in the back of a church, don't they?
Oh, there's a podcast on it. Liz, Uncanny Lassie. Is that Liz Barkley? She says the Lawmen have a great and rather funny podcast episode on this subject. I've never heard it, but we should definitely have a link for that if somebody can Right, okay, I'll make a note of that and we'll find it because I've never heard it. It's not a subject many people have ever written about that I knew of, so I'm just really pleased somebody else knows about it. And if it's funny, let's go and listen to it. Okay, Jackie Tonks, was it priming? Possibly. Might be that everyone knew about it before they saw it. Everybody in our account had heard of it. A sheet on a broomstick through the letterbox. Okay. When I first went to college, some idiot put a mop through my bedroom window but didn't bother to open it first. So trying to scare me, and I was covered in broken glass. I really was not impressed. Isn't stained glass opaque? Technically translucent. So two different types of stained glass. Medieval stained glass, you have colorants, minerals baked into the glass. Victorian stained glass is made in a similar way, so the glass is translucent so the light can come through it. Stained glass that isn't translucent would be completely useless. It would just look black from the inside, so you have to have an element of light coming through. Early Victorian glass and glass from the 17th and 18th century and some really cheap Victorian glass was made by baking a layer on top, and a few people attempted, I mean people did, you know, stain glass by painting it, so it was actually stained, but it has to be thin enough to be translucent, so you can always see a bird on the other side, for example. There's a story, a ghost story by H.R. Wakefield, which features the vicar of a church who can see sees an apparition outside while he's performing communion, I think, but that would be written somewhere between about 1890 and 1920. No, it'd be after 1901 probably. His first collection's 1901, so somewhere between the 1890s and the 1930s for Wakefield. H.R. Wakefield is very good, by the way. I recommend him if you enjoy M.R. James. Worth checking out Wakefield. Any actual suggestions? Students playing silly buggers with mirrors. It's a great idea, but I'm not sure how you do it. Is there another building facing this aspect of the church? Yes, Jacob's Well.
I wrote that before you told me.
Local theatre group doing ad hoc rehearsal. It sounds like it, doesn't it? It sounds very melodramatic. Yeah. The figures appear to be, now, one of the things that comes over to me is that the figures are wearing white and are glowing. So they appear to have their own, they appear to have an internally generated light. So what do you call a figure that appears at a church glowing in white?
A Scooby-Doo character?
I think it's an angel, is what it sounds like. They sound like angels. They're melodramatic, they're messengers, they're imparting some kind of message to someone. What the message may be, I do not know, but obviously nobody thought they were angels, so I'm clearly...
I was going to say, nobody in any of those accounts ever said it was an angel.
No, they all think they're ghosts, yeah. Yeah, the church is mainly busy on Sundays. Internal reflection with the light effectively using the stained glass window as a mirror. It's got to work in such a way that it can only be seen by people above the line of sight, which would suggest that the panes would have to be the leading in the panes. When I was a child, I lived in a very old Jacobean farmhouse, and it was, my bedroom had leaded windows. I mean, I don't know what health and safety would make of that nowadays, but they had diamond panes, and the lead, and the windows were so old that the glass was by no means straight. And when the light hit it, it was like the bottom of a bottle, because, you know, over the centuries, the glass had run or changed shape. And I can imagine a situation where the light could have reflected on it and given you some weird pictures. One of the scariest things I ever saw was after I'd been reading a book on UFOs, and I was cycling back across the farm one day, and I saw this intensely brilliant white light ahead of me, and I was convinced it was some kind of alien entity that had landed. And as I got a bit closer, because I kept riding up thinking I better go and investigate, it turned out to be the sun reflecting off a tractor window. I mean, you know, glass reflections can be confusing, but possibly had more to do with what I'd been reading than, yeah.
CJ, just one quick little thing. Glass is actually what's called I believe it's called a super liquid. So it is a liquid, so that's why it tends to flow, but just really slowly. That's why glass gets thicker at the bottom and thinner at the top as it gets older. That's why they did diamond panes of glass, is so that if you had a big sheet, it would just sort of melt down to the bottom of it. So they did diamond panes to stop it from doing that. There you
Yeah,
go.
unfortunately, although it's a super liquid, it effectively is a solid because it moves so slowly that unless you are possibly, I don't think there's any entity, well, possibly some kind of whales and other creatures that live centuries, you would have to be waiting over a period of centuries or millennia to notice it. But that is why, yeah, windows are thicker at the bottom than the top, blah, blah, blah. But yeah. I mean, I don't know what caused it. And the original window was destroyed and was taken away and was scrapped. If it had been valuable glass, if it was medieval glass, it would almost certainly have been taken and placed in another building. The only thing I can think of, and this is why I wish we still had Hannah here, but she's probably gone off to do something useful, is they built a Methodist chapel, I think it was, just over the road in the middle of the period in question. And if the Methodist chapel was built about the time it was that they demolished the window, which was 1906, it's possible that that window would have been reused. It's also possible that it was sold in 1906, and if you look through the papers for stained glass for sale, you could find out where the window is now, because it could have been moved into a private house, or the glass could have been reused, in which case ASSAP would purchase it if we could, or would at least send a couple of people to a hotel to go and shine lights at it. I'm quite happy if anyone wants to go to York and do a serious investigation to give resources to get it done properly. If you think that there could be something about the acoustics of the church, for example, that's worth monitoring, if you think that you could find something in the archives in York, if you think that if you go to York, you would be able to establish something that will add to this mystery, let me know and I will make those arrangements, because that is what we're supposed to do. I want to try and crack the mystery. I don't think it's been solved yet.
I guess, though, having no gallery there in that church presently, that will be difficult to get that same kind of perspective angle again. Do we actually know what height that original gallery was at? So I guess there's a potential of horror in what's known as a cherry picker, which is like a platform with an extendable.
Yeah, I've driven a cherry picker. We use them to guttering and things. The problem with cherry pickers is vicars aren't very keen on you usually driving them inside the church.
No, of course.
They're happy for you to go up. The tower's still there. The roof looks different above where the gallery was. My suspicion is that the gallery, and a lot of galleries on older churches from that period, if you're looking at Regency ones like St Paul's, Cheltenham, they'll have built a screen across the gallery. And they don't use it, but it's still there and is used as a room or a storage room or something like that. So my guess is the gallery is still there. Jackie, yeah, please do. If anyone wants to go down and have a look, help yourselves. And oh, there's a ghost hunt at Jacob's Well soon. Okay, well, if anyone wants to go to it and report what they find, that would be fantastic. Was there a functional organ, I wonder? That's an interesting idea. Why would it, Jane, why would it increase the perceived gesticulations, the vibrations? So the windows vibrate.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because in the one account they say about, wasn't it the increase in the gesticulations of the phenomena?
Yeah.
So I just wonder if we've got a functional organ, and some of them, when they boom, they don't half vibrate. If it was potentially reflections, I suppose that's one thing. Could that affect the windows? Could that affect the perception of change? But if we are actually saying it's a phenomena, then what about the energy from the vibrations, etc.?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we could certainly carry out some work. A lot of my friends have worked on psychoacoustics over the years. Steve Hume's here tonight. Steve, you've worked on acoustics, haven't you, quite extensively? But you're muted at the moment.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah. Yes.
And can you think of any acoustic phenomena that could be involved here?
No.
No.
Not off the top of my head. I'm feeling a little bit dozy at the moment, though. So if something occurs to me by tomorrow morning, I shall. I'll update you. But off the top of my head, no. If Steve Parsons were here, I think he would maybe be speculating about infrasound or
standing waves.
Yeah,
but a standing wave would be generated halfway down the church, not at least as far as I can see. It wouldn't be at the west end only, because the wave would...
I wasn't so much thinking about standing waves as infrasound from a great distance away.
Yeah, but I mean, Tandy Tandy's original hypothesis, because I knew him vaguely, and well, he was ex-PhD supervisor till he died. Tandy's hypothesis was that infrasound on its own is meaningless because it's ubiquitous. Because 19.3 hertz or whatever it was he was looking for can be found everywhere. You need to actually have the infrasound connected with a standing wave, which is what gave you the point when his fencing foil started to vibrate. And in Cellar, he's quite clear about that. It was when the skeptics picked it up, they tended to use the term infrasound without reference to the standing wave. But because of that, you can calculate, and I mean, you know, the standing wave effect. The standing wave will occur at multiple locations, but it's going to be most peaked. The amplitude is going to be greatest, surely, at the point where, you know, you've got the greatest amount of. Actually, hang on.
You do get other phenomena to do with low frequency stuff, apart from standing waves. I mean, there's the boundary effect. I've got that in as I'm looking now.
Yeah,
you can't see, but my studio is at the other end of this room.
Yeah,
where I do mixing and stuff like that. Now, my listening environment isn't very accurate. Essentially, it's a normal living space with some inadequate acoustic treatment to try and even things out a bit.
Yeah.
So when I'm mixing stuff, because my monitors are quite near the back wall, you get something called the boundary effect, where low frequencies are heightened at a certain distance from the boundary, from the wall. And if I found that over the years, if I don't want to use a subwoofer or something like that, if I want to get an accurate idea of the low end, it's best to start off near the monitors and then slowly walk backwards. And as you walk backwards, you hear, as you pass through various layers of it, you hear the low end change in volume until you reach a point just behind me, which over the years I've found that you get a realistic idea of what's really coming out of the speakers.
So which point, that's more central in the room, but the boundary effect takes place how far from the walls?
Well, in my place, it's in my place. If it's within a foot, but I'm not sure if it would be different in a bigger space.
But in a vaulted church, you're going to have really different effects.
Well, you're going to get a very complicated, quite a relatively complicated environment there.
Yeah.
You do get parabolic effects as well, where I've seen it before. There's a place in Oxford that I go to concerts, and it's the oldest purpose-built concert hall in Europe. I think it's called Hollywood, Hollywell. Hollywell. It's on Hollywell Street. I can't remember the actual name of the place, but it's if you go in there and you're listening to a performance on the stage, you don't need amplification because it's designed to focus the sound in various places from the stage, and you get effects like that. So I would imagine you would have to get an expert in to do a proper acoustic mapping of the interior of the church.
Yeah, which would be expensive and difficult to achieve. But Steve Parsons,
it would, yeah. No, Steve would be a great place to start.
Yeah, send Steve on with you. You and Steve can go.
Oh yeah, I'd love to.
Now, I just had another alternative idea, which is that I think Jane could be right. Imagine for a moment a massive organ. I'm, sadly Dean's not here tonight because his massive organ has caused me much distress over the years. He decided to acquire a 30-foot church pipe organ, and we had to put it in his house with a piano moving company. He took his bay window out and we installed it, and he cut a hole through so the pipes could go up and down into the basement. And the pumps are in the basement and the pipes go the whole way. You've seen his organ, haven't you, Dave? Mr. Sivia. Have you never seen DC's organ?
No, I've never seen his mighty organ. I've heard tales of it.
Yeah, it is massive. He keeps the pumps down in the basement with his dentist chair and all that stuff. And it goes study, but yeah, he's got a church organ in his house because he likes to play organ music in the middle of the night to please his neighbours and those in the 2 streets adjacent. Dave is often here. He's normally here, but he's not here tonight, so I don't know where he is. Probably been arrested for playing the organ in the middle of the night. But the thing about his organ is that it vibrates quite a strong, that's presumably how the pipes work. So what if there was some combination of vibration from the pipes on the organ when it's being played and reflection of light? Could that happen? Could the pipes vibrate enough, or would that create a noise that would be just completely
Well, going another angle at this, CJ, let's not talk about organs for a bit. But if you go to a rock concert, for example, and you're in a gig, a big Wembley or something a little bit smaller, you get that kind of visualization of the speakers vibrating that look like they're moving, don't they?
I'll take your word for it.
So anything that's going to be reverberating that level of sound, and you're going to get shining from the sun coming in on it, it is possible it will reflect and refract some light.
Or the windows, the panes of glass could individually vibrate in the lead at some
Absolutely.
But I still don't think any of this is people at the time were not stupid. I mean, I definitely got the impression from the accounts I read out that they were not stupid.
Well, the accounts that were written was very educated, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they were doing better than most ghost hunters nowadays would manage, weren't they?
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to give due credence to witness reports, no matter how old they are. And so something occurred to me earlier on when I was listening to it. If I could just play devil's advocate for the paranormalist interpretation of it for the moment, I'm not saying that this is the case, but what came into my mind was phantasms of the living and the senses of hallucinations, which I know you're familiar with, CJ. And in there, and mentioned by Tyrrell as well in his book Apparitions, is the fact that what the SPR regarded as being the better corroborated cases of apparitional experiences, especially one that I'm thinking of that involved more than one witness, is that the recipients often remarked that what they were seeing, it occurred to them at the time or just afterwards, they were seeing in too much detail to have possibly seen it with their normal eyes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's the case of the woman who sees her father riding out to hunting.
That's the one. That's the one that I'm thinking of.
He takes his hat off like that, and she reads the label inside his hat.
Yeah, even though he's about 200 yards away. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the case.
Now, I'm sort of fortunate enough, or perhaps unfortunate enough, to have seen quite a few apparitions during my life. I mean, I don't take any particular interpretation on them. I'm talking from childhood up until about 5 or 6 years ago. Now, I noticed that independently on my own. After a while, it occurred to me every time I had an experience like this, but one in particular, it suddenly occurred to me I could not possibly have seen that level of detail from that distance. And listening to these accounts, it sounded to me as though I was trying to put myself in the position of the witnesses and thinking they're describing too much detail from 30 to 40 feet away through a layer of stained glass. So if we think for a moment about I think it was Gurney, Myers, and Podmore, wasn't it? They were the authors of Phantasms of the Living, and Tyrrell's development of that. That it was some sort of shared telepathic hallucination, perhaps mediated by psychological factors such as expectation and stuff like that. Then you can begin to to understand how, from that angle, from that perspective, this could work.
Actually, telepathic hallucinations, which is one of the subjects I've talked about many times. I was going to talk about something related to that tonight, until I decided at the last moment to throw together what I had on this case, because I thought it was better to go with something case-led rather than theory-led, because I've done so many weeks on theory of ghosts that if I'd turned up once more and talked about them, people might have shot me. So, but yeah, absolutely. It is interesting as a possibility that there is some kind of group hallucination or generated apparition. The other thing that struck me is there could be a prosaic ghost hoax, because most of the pit cases in the period are ghost hoaxes, and it could be as simple as a vicar attempting to win back the congregation from a rival chapel that's opened. It reminds me of the story, I'm sure you've all heard it, of the chap who's at the front of the service, and at the end of the service, his mate, this bloke who's sitting next to him, leans over and says, "Look, Stephen, it's lovely to meet you, but can you go and talk to the Reverend Lovejoy for half an hour? No, 40 minutes. And he says, "Why do you want me to do that?" And he said, "It's not because I'm concerned about your soul. It's because I'm making love to Mrs. Lovejoy. We're having an affair. And we're going to dash out into the car park and see one another and, you know, get it on. So I want you to keep the vicar busy." And Mike, that's his name, turns around to Stephen and says, "Oh, okay then." And he feels really bad about it, but he goes up to the Reverend Lovejoy and says, "Reverend Lovejoy, lovely to meet you." And he gives him a hug. "You haven't met me before. I'm Stephen." And the Reverend's really pleased to see him, and they talk and they talk and they talk. And after 35 minutes, the Reverend says, "Look, you're just wasting my time, Stephen. What is your problem? The Lord will judge you one day. Tell me the truth, young man. Why are you just wittering on like an inane idiot? A nincompoop, sir, a nincompoop." And so Stephen turns around and says, "Well, you see, I came here with my wife, or we were at the front there, we were sitting there, and that bloke who was sitting next to me, oh, it's no good. I'm just going to have to tell you, your wife's having an affair with that guy, Stephen. With that guy, Stephen." And the vicar looks at him and said, "And he told you to come and talk to me for half an hour while he made love to my wife?" "Yes, that's right. My wife lived 10 years ago. I'd go and look for what yours is up to. My wife died 10 years ago. I'd go and see what yours is up to." Okay, it's a very old joke. It's one of the oldest Anglican jokes. But despite the fact it's a shit joke, that kind of thing does go on. People do carry out ridiculous scams for no reason. It is possible that
yes, yeah. I mean, I've over the years, I think I've uncovered 2 or 3 cases of gratuitous, egregious fraud. Where you end up thinking, it's actually quite an education, because you end up thinking to yourself, well, people really do things like this. It does happen. And so it's a big mistake not to have that at the front of your mind. It's unfortunate, but people really do the most extraordinary things.
I'll have to confess that this is where my gut feeling is. I mean, when my mother-in-law died a good few years ago, I was talking to the vicar who was doing the service, and I also knew him through doing my research into the Black Rider of Stockport. And we were talking about ghosts, and he said, I was at the hospice a year or so ago, and I was talking to one of the patients who'd been the landlord of the, can't remember the name, the Dog and Duck and all that. And he said, I said to him, the Dog and Duck, isn't that the pub that's all haunted? And the landlord said to him, he said, "No, it's not haunted at all, but we spread the story. It didn't half boost the attendance at the pub." And this is one of the things that I suspect that the vicar started off to boost attendance, with maybe his family doing it. I mean, they all went, they all looked through from the gallery themselves, and I can't remember whether they said they couldn't see it or they saw it. And the independent,
They saw it, but they weren't able to explain it. That was the story.
yeah,
The first,
but when they then talked about there was independent corroboration of somebody outside, doesn't say who it was. I think from the records, it was probably his best mate, or something, or something like that. And then they pass it on down the line for the vicars because it's a way of boosting. I mean, don't forget that was one of the ways that they got their income.
sure, except this is 1835, and the abolition of tithes is, when's the abolition of tithes? Mr. Sivia, Dr. Sivia, when did they abolish tithes in the UK? Ed, anyone?
It would have been sometime in the 19th century because there was considerable pressure
Yeah,
against it.
There's the Welsh Disestablishment Act is much later. That's 1904. So I think in Britain the tithes are not taken away till the 1860s, 1870s, or 1880s. So at that point, it's irrelevant to your income, because whether you're a Methodist, a Baptist, or a Jew or a Hindu, you're still paying tithes to the Church of England. They're taken as church rates in this period. So membership, attendance at church wasn't actually required to give you the income. And in fact, the reason why people like Sabine Baring-Gould could write 1,240 books was because he didn't actually have to do a damn day's work. He could hire somebody else if he wanted to take the sermon, send his curate along and do as little as possible. Though he did actually used to like preaching and telling stories and singing. So the question then remains, is there any other motive other than the next thing I thought of was, could it be some kind of sectarian thing? But nobody really seems to be thinking of it from a spiritual angle. And I was wondering, is there anything going on in the 1830s which would lead people to start seeing manifestations of angels or seeing these ghosts? Why did they not go out and do the obvious thing if they believe it's ghosts from a grave and carry out just a rite of exorcism or a blessing? And the reason is because the 1830s, there is a terrible fear of Methodism from the 1780s onwards, and enthusiasm, and of people who might be, falling into mesmeric phenomena. And people don't like enthusiasm. Was the biggest evil, because enthusiasm was when you got excited about your religion or passionate about it and bothered other people about it. And that was the one thing you couldn't do in 19th century and in Regency Christianity in particular. Vicars were not enthusiasts. And it's like Yeats' famous line, the best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passionate intensity. That summarizes the early 19th century attitude of the British clergy towards religious fervour. They were deeply suspicious of it. And it's a rationalist age. It's a period when people are very much defenders of a rational, broad church faith. So they might have just not wanted to have any taint of supernaturalism. It's 6 years after Roman Catholic emancipation, isn't it, Dave? And as a result of that, there's a fear of superstition and there's a fear of what they call popery. It's 3 years after the Bampton lecture, the 33rd Bampton lecture on the national apostasy, where they talk about, the dangers of England becoming a Catholic state and us falling back into superstition and all those kind of dreadful things that were prevalent in the Middle Ages. And so the last thing the vicar's going to want to have is a genuine supernatural miracle. It's like, polite vicars do not like it when you see doves descending over their altar. They are filled with horror because it's an unauthorized bit of charisma. It's not sanctioned by the church. It's happening to a member of the congregation and therefore dangerous.
Wouldn't it have had to involve several vicars as well, though? Because we're talking about a long time period.
Yeah, there's at least 3 or 4 in that time period, and I suspect more. I mean, I didn't manage to get a full list. It's on the website. I'm pretty sure I could have done, but as I said, I was trying to stitch this together in 2 hours before this afternoon because I've had a lot going on this week.
Are most of these sightings after 1848?
Yes.
Well, and another possibility is, during that period, it was obviously the rise of modern spiritualism. You'd had Swedenborg and Andrew Jackson Davis prior to that.
You do.
But there was an upsurge in interest in this sort of thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And,
So
I recently found a paper by the Reverend Francis Close. Now, Francis Close was an evangelical bigot, Protestant bigot of the highest order. He was a fanatic in his own strange way, but in a very restrained way. And he was eventually sent off to be Dean of Carlisle after going to a workhouse and preaching a sermon in front of the inmates of the workhouse on how a pregnant woman who was dying in childbirth would be in hell within the hour because she was dying an unrepentant sinner. Rather than actually, administering any kind of help or spiritual solace, he instead used her as a terrible example of, So he was not a very nice man, but he did also publish a paper in 1849, I think it was, called 1850, Table Turning, Not Demonic, a defense of table turning. And in which he said that spiritualism and spiritualist phenomena were signs of God's grace and of the reality of the supernatural realm, and should not be dismissed as the work of evil spirits.
Yeah, and many substantial number of churchmen did take that view. I mean, the obvious example is Stainton Moses.
Absolutely.
Later on, there were Vale Owen and people like that. So it's definitely interesting. It would be nice to see what period, if there's a cluster of the sightings in a particular period after, and just to see if it coincided with any wider social commentary on things like this.
Okay, well, it's 9 o'clock. I'm going to go. Good luck to Emma and Noisy. I don't know if Emma's still here, but if she is, good luck with Noisy. I hope that he's doing really